Hello, everyone, and welcome to Real Talk, a candid conversation about the power of the minority vote. I'm Ginger Gadsden. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Tonight's town hall will focus on the upcoming election, the growing number of minority voters in Florida, the impact they could have on this election, and the impact this election could have on them. Florida is a battleground state.
Here in Florida, you can determine the outcome of this election.
Joe Biden and President Trump,
we're going to win Florida big. We're going to win a lot of states big,
are both trying to win Florida and appeal to minority voters, who make up more than 30% of all registered voters in Florida, who deeply care about a variety of issues. And they know their voice can call the election.
If enough Latino evangelicals vote in one direction over another, there goes the election.
And while the focus has been on getting people to vote,
there are so many people who at one point faced a lifetime ban from voting that's now going to have the opportunity to participate in elections.
It has also been on making sure felons who just got their right to vote restored had their fines paid off so they could register.
88,000 people donate to the Fines and Fees Fund, and we've been able to raise $25 million that we've distributed across the state.
Many have called the new requirement to pay those fees voter suppression.
It's crazy, but it's designed. To me, it's like a poll tax. Okay, voter suppression.
Whose vote are they trying to suppress?
Black and brown, lower income voters. It affects them most.
But the donations of many are helping some of the more than 770,000 impacted Floridians make it to the polls, all in the midst of a pandemic.
Our voters have health concerns. They just don't know what November 3rd is going to look like.
This moment is sending people in Florida and around the country rushing to make their voices heard.
Well, I want to be out here and to be able to share my voice.
So many people have sacrificed before us, so it's almost a spin in their face if we don't take the time to show our kids that they have this right and it's best used as early as possible.
There is a lot to unpack, and tonight we have an esteemed panel of experts to answer your questions surrounding the upcoming election and the power of the minority vote. They are Eric LeBron, a UCF student from Puerto Rico who is voting in his first presidential election, Susan Scatliff for the Orange County Supervisor of Elections Office, Beverly C. Neal, the president of the Orange County branch of the NAACP, and Dr. Kenesha Wright, an assistant professor for UCF's School of Politics, Security, and International Affairs. And if you're watching, you can submit your questions right now and throughout this virtual town hall by going to clickorlando.com/Real Talk. I think it's going to be a great conversation tonight. And we want to begin with one big question, and I would like for each of you to answer this question. That question is, why do you think your vote matters so much this year? And we're going to start with you, Ms. Neal.
Good evening. Well, being a child of a product of the civil rights movement, my parents have always impressed upon me the importance of voting. Why it's important this time is because our lives depend on it. Too much is hanging in the mist as how we will end up voting during this election. I am a 73-year-old retired senior. I depend on Social Security, Medicare. Not only that, but I'm diabetic. I need medical supplies, and my medical supplies are not cheap. So these are just things that's are life-saving to me. So I will say with unequivocally that I am voting because my life depends on it.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Scatliff?
Well, here at the Orange County Election Office, voting is important to us every year. Being in the election office for 20 years plus, I vote every election, so it's very important to me. Personally, working at the election office, so it's important to us here at Orange County Election Office every year, not just this year.
Sure,
Thank
and
you.
you see it firsthand. Thank you.
I see it.
Yeah, Dr. Wright, how about you?
Excellent. I would echo those same points, right? So many people have fought for a very long time to secure the right to vote, particularly for minorities and women. The fight has been a bit longer. I think now that we have the ability to vote, that is how you make your issues known to politicians and political representatives, similar to what Ms. Neal mentioned, right? She expressed some of the interests and issues that are a top priority to older individuals, but issues vary based on your age, based on your race, based on your ethnicity, based on your gender, right? And the intersections vary. And so you vote so that others in the political process can know the issues that are important to you to make your voices heard. And I think in the previous 4 years and in general, we've seen that presidents can be responsive to the needs of the public, but the public has to make sure we turn out and exercise our incredibly important right to vote.
And Eric, this is the first time you will have your voice heard in a presidential election. Tell us why you think your vote matters so much this year.
You know, I belong to communities and work with communities that have been historically disenfranchised and who face numerous disparities. I belong to the Hispanic community, the LGBT community. I work with young people. As a college student, there are many issues that we are passionate about. That includes education. It includes the rights of sexual minorities. It includes immigration policies. It includes healthcare. There's so much on the ballot this year that we simply cannot afford to simply not vote. As a first-time voter, I'm very passionate. I'm looking forward to it, and I really hope that underrepresented communities can be heard this year.
Oh, and I hope so many people are watching and listening to you. And for those who are deciding maybe not to vote or this could be their first election, I hope they're taking a page from your textbook. Thank you for those answers. So we have a big story that we've been staying on top of recently, and we're talking about voter intimidation. And we're seeing it play out in real time, and it's happening right now. For example, the Flagler County Sheriff's Office says 2 people in their county have received threatening emails. This comes after the Brevard County Sheriff's Office announced it is investigating threatening emails where the sender claims they are in possession of the person's information and states, quote, "You will vote for Trump on election day or we will come after you," end quote. Investigators say it appears the emails originated from outside of the United States. The sheriff says the community is safe to go to the polls. So the question is, this is happening in Brevard and Flagler. Ms. Gatliff, what's being done in Orange County to make sure voters feel safe as they head to the polls on election day?
Well, I saw the news this morning about this article that you are talking about. I also manage a phone bank, so we haven't taken any call in concern to this, but if people feel uncomfortable when they go out to the location, they need to just either call our office and let us know what is taking place, or even talk to a poll worker that is at those locations to let them know what they're feeling, what is happening, and we would handle it at the Orange County Election Office if we have to.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we're getting emails from some of our viewers now. This one is for Ms. Neal. Amanda mentioned the violence and political unrest across the country. She's wondering if minority voters in Central Florida have any sort of concern, or should they be concerned about their safety. Ms. Neal?
As of today, we have not heard of any violence or any acts of intimidation. I've been in constant contact with Sheriff Mina as well as Orlando Police Department. Just recently, Monday, I spoke with Sheriff Mina to just make sure that they are not hearing anything and no intelligence is coming through about any kind of intimidation. And he said that as of the time that he and I talked, that there was nothing in the air.
So, Ms. Gatliff, the question is for you, is that some people, they will still hear this and they will still, feel that what's happening around the country and the recent examples we just gave you here, what advice would you give to people who are going to be heading to the polls November 3rd? What would you say to them? Because some people might find this alarming enough to stay home.
Well, I would tell them, go to the poll. I mean, I am just speaking on behalf of Orange County Election Office. Mm-hmm. We try our best to make every voter feels comfortable. Like I said, and Ms. Neal said, I haven't heard of any violence or anything happening at our early voting location, which is already open since October 19th. So, I mean, I feel comfortable. I'm speaking on behalf of me and Orange County Election Office that every voter could go to any one of these locations and feel comfortable, and if they have any concern, please call our office and we will address the issue. We also have local police officers out there who is at some of these locations. We have the poll worker trained to handle these incidents if any incident occur, and if they feel that uncomfortable, just call the election office and we will help them and guide them on what to do.
Sure. The big concern a lot of people have, though, is that if you are especially an older voter and, you know, your voice needs to be heard too. And sometimes it can be very intimidating. And if they don't get the news as quickly as most other people because they're not as savvy online or getting updates as they should, saying that it is safe to go to the polls. Dr. Wright, do you feel like this might impact older voters a little more than other voters?
I would say absolutely there's that possibility, right? Older voters, similar to what you mentioned, are less likely to use sort of internet and other resources as prevalently as younger voters, right? I would also say Latino or individuals who are not maybe English speaking as their dominant language can also be more susceptible to these sort of efforts at voter intimidation. I would echo the points that have been made, right? Reaching out to others, expressing when you feel uncomfortable. And I also respect and admire and appreciate WKMG having a report that says these are not accurate, right? Highlighting these as false sources of intimidation, right? If someone feels unsafe, I think you should reach out to the proper authorities to have, you know, ensured safety while you're going to exercise your right to vote. But I definitely think we have certain segments of the population that are more vulnerable. I would encourage people, once we're making the information clear that these are sort of efforts at suppressing the votes of certain individuals, reach out to family members, encourage people to go and vote, you know, in groups if you can safely with the sort of COVID context and social distancing guidelines in mind.
Sure. Okay. And we know that voter suppression is nothing new, especially to black voters. Since Congress passed the 15th Amendment in 1870, black voters have continued to experience having issues. Now, some veiled, others more obvious, like the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. when he led people to register to vote in Selma, Alabama. This was in 1965, which when you think about in terms of historical purposes was yesterday. 60 people were arrested. So, Dr. Wright, how are we still seeing examples of voter suppression today? And we just talked about getting those threatening emails and, you know, people saying that if you go to the polls and you don't vote for my candidate, that something bad will happen to you. What are some other examples we're seeing, Dr. Wright?
We're also seeing examples sort of as recent as the Shelby County versus Holder decision, right? So we had the Voting Rights Act of 1965, similar to what you mentioned. Sometimes we view different amendments as being the start of everyone being able to access their right to vote, but that isn't the case. We've had poll taxes, we've had literacy tests, we've had different efforts to reduce or suppress the influence that minority voters can have. The Shelby County versus Holder decision, in effect, you know, canceled the section 4.4B of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. And the Voting Rights Act was enacted so that we could have more equality and relaxation of some of the things that were targeting minority voters. But even that decision, right, we're still seeing legislation play a really important role in shaping whether or not minorities have a clear and safe access to the ballot box. But to your first question, right, I think these efforts to reduce or make it more difficult for certain individuals to vote highlight the importance of voting, right? If your vote didn't matter, there wouldn't be these efforts to reduce or suppress the influence or make it more difficult for you to exercise that right.
Sure. And, you know, I think that there's a political ad saying something like that with Samuel L. Jackson right now. If your vote didn't matter, they wouldn't try so hard to take it away from you. And so, Dr. Neal, you talked about being 73 years old and how you've lived, you are a certain generation. When you hear of things, you know, like voter suppression still happening in this day and age, what goes through your mind? Because we feel like we've come a long way, but in some regards, we've only taken baby steps.
Well, Ginger, I don't think that we have enough time tonight to really hear my thoughts. I'm going to be very honest with you. I think that we have lost 50 years of gains that we had made in fighting for our civil rights. And I just want to go back on what you were talking about in terms of voter suppression. We also have in place and will be at the polls and in each state election protection groups. We've got attorneys working with us, and then we've got poll monitors. As a matter of fact, the Orange County branch has identified 38 precincts that are African American that we will be having poll monitors to make sure that people's votes are not suppressed. But to get back to what you're saying, I lived in a house of civil rights fighters. And all I've known all my life is to fight for my freedom. And I'm going to continue to fight. But what is so disheartening is to see the people who, they did not die for us to have the right to vote. They were killed, okay? It's a difference. And there doesn't seem to be any kind of commemorative efforts put in place for those people who sacrificed their lives. We've got to be better and be more sacred about what we do. Voting is just not a process. That's the day that everybody comes together and we're all equal. You're talking about equal rights. This is the time when everybody goes to that ballot box. You got one vote, and you should exercise it with all your might, be proud of it, and not only that, but take other people to vote. I took my 94-year-old cousin yesterday to vote, and she was so happy. And we can't sit back and let people tell us their vote doesn't count. We've got to show them how their vote can count. We've got 114 bills or more, 44, sitting now waiting to be approved by the Senate. We have got to vote. We can't afford to go through another 4 years of this kind of stagnating.
I wish I could take you around with me to people who say they aren't voting this year and just have them listen to you. And we would make more time for you to plead your case and hear your story, because you're like a novel, you're a book, you're a history book just sitting right there. So, you talked about the poll watchers, and during the first presidential debate, President Trump cast doubts that ballots would be counted correctly and then issued a call to action for his supporters. So listen to this.
I'm urging my supporters to go into the polls and watch very carefully, because that's what has to happen. I am urging them to do it.
Okay, so before I just want to hear from Ms. Neal again. When you hear that, what do you think?
Well, it's complete ignorance, and I'm going to tell you why. Because, first of all, he doesn't know the difference between vote by mail and absentee ballot. They're one in the same. And anytime we have to be careful who we listen to, because bad information in is bad information out. And this is what you have. You have somebody who does not have a clue, not the slightest clue, about what political involvement is, about even what voting is. He votes by absentee ballot, but yet and still he's telling people not to get the mail-in ballot. So it's damn if you do and damn if you don't.
Okay, so Ms. Scatliff, tell us a little bit more about what we should know as we head to the polls about, making sure that our vote is counted.
Well, first of all, before you head to the poll, make sure when you go to the poll, you have your picture and signature ID when you enter the early voting location, and we have 20 early voting locations out there. If you don't want to early vote, you could always request a vote by mail ballot to be sent to you at home. The deadline for that would be Saturday by 5 p.m., so we have time. We have to let people know that if they request a vote by mail, it must be in by election night, which is November 3rd, no later than 7 p.m. But make sure that they go to vote. They have 2 ballots, which is two-sided. Get in there with the picture and signature ID. Every vote counts.
Absolutely. Okay, so Dr. Wright, would you like to weigh in on that?
I would sort of echo those same points, right? I think we're seeing, to build off the previous comment, we're seeing an increase in people who have registered to vote. We're seeing an increase of people who are exploring interest in mail-in ballots, right? But making sure you're familiar with the process becomes really important, because again, just because you're not able to make it to a voting center, a voting polling place, doesn't mean you can't contribute your vote, right? You can share your vote by a mail-in ballot, but you want to make sure you understand the requirements so that your ballot isn't invalidated, right? We have seen sort of early reports suggesting that even through the mail-in ballot process, there are these sort of discretions involved in the selection process. So again, make sure you visit either your election office website or Florida Votes information online so that you can understand exactly what you need to do to vote in the way that makes you most comfortable. Being familiar with those deadlines and the required components become key to, again, exercising this important right.
Sure. Okay, so Eric, I hope you've been taking copious notes, because I want to ask you about what you're expecting when you cast your ballot on November 3rd. I'm just assuming that you will go on that day unless you've already early voted.
So I will most likely do early voting. I think that early voting would be the most convenient for me. But like I said, there's a lot at stake this election. And I think that the current administration has engaged in certain kinds of behavior that have been an attack on human dignity. They have been an attack on us minorities. And honestly, it doesn't surprise me that there's so much intimidation going on, because these are fear tactics. A lot of people know that our voice is powerful. Young people are powerful. Brown and black communities are powerful. And so I plan to go to vote because of the people that I represent. Candidates on both sides have been targeting Puerto Ricans, not just in Central Florida, but also in the island, because they know that the Puerto Rican voice does matter, as well as other Hispanics and other minorities in this country.
And can you tell me a little bit about the conversations you're having with friends and peers who are your age? Because, you know, we just ran a political ad, and I think it's the first time that former President Obama has been out stumping for Vice President Joe Biden. And he said that the young people can really sway this election. What kinds of conversations are you having with your friends?
So right now, I think one of the things that matters the most to young people, obviously, is education. Education being affordable, them having good access to mental health resources and healthcare. I know that a lot of young people who do come from other countries are also concerned about their visas being revoked, about the fact that a lot of them would have had to go back home for a variety of reasons. I think that young people really do care about the election, but in many ways, the system has been designed in such a way that discourages their vote. It makes them feel that their vote doesn't actually count. It makes them feel that they have to lose faith in the system. I think that young people do have what it takes, and as it was stated, I think they could very much sway the vote.
And, you know, and I'm just going to ask you one more question, because we got one online for you, and it says, Mr. LeBron, countless Puerto Ricans fleeing the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in 2017 have settled here in Central Florida. How do you think this will affect the election results in Florida? And do you think those residents will be inspired to vote in the presidential race, since they could not vote while living in Puerto Rico? And you kind of touched upon those answers already.
Absolutely. So I'm a leader at UCF, and I also do work with faith communities near Azalea Park and other parts of Central Florida, where the growth of the Puerto Rican population, or people of Puerto Rican descent, has been growing astronomically. I think this will definitely have an impact in the election. A lot of people have been very dissatisfied with the way the president and the current administration handled the situation after Hurricane Maria. Puerto Rico needs the government to invest in economic relief. It needs the government to invest in infrastructure. It needs the government to invest in renewable energy. And these are issues that, again, not only have affected the Puerto Ricans in the island, but family members, friends that live here in the United States do very much care about the way Puerto Ricans in the island are treated. And so I think that will definitely have an impact. People have seen the difficulties and the obstacles that they've had to face. Although Puerto Ricans are United States citizens, we have faced tremendous obstacles having to navigate the system over here, which definitely has been built against us.
Okay, so we've talked about, you know, the difference between the mail-in ballots and early voting, and a lot of people are already rushing to the polls around Central Florida. And this was actually refreshing to see. So far, more than 2.9 million Floridians have voted by mail, and more than 720,000 have showed up to vote early. So we talked to some of them about the importance of voting, and this is what some of them had to say. Listen to this.
No vote, no voice. Plain and simple.
Oh, because I'm so happy that I voted.
How people died. They died. They were killed for the right to vote. And they need to wake up and stop saying it doesn't make any difference. They're both no good. No, you better get your behind out there and vote.
Proud that I have a say in what's going to go on in the government.
Well, you know, I'm not a teenager, and I'm one of the most likely ones that would be affected the most. But it's worth it.
But we also want to show him the importance of voting as well and what it means. So.
And even if you got to wait in a long line, it's worth it, right?
It is worth it, right? Okay, so with that being said, Ms. Neal, we have a question for you. Someone wants to know, they said you've been with the NAACP for decades now and have been involved in multiple elections. What would you say to someone who may not think voting is important or even necessary? Go easy on them.
I promise. I'll try. I'll put it like that. You know, education is so important, and I think that this is the problem that we're having. We haven't done enough educating about the importance of voting. When you vote for people who are going to make laws that's going to determine your livelihood. That's the first thing. I had a debate with a young man, ladies and gentlemen. He had been in prison back in the 90s during the drug episodes. And he was upset because of the crime bill. But then, you know what I mean, I told him, I said, listen, you were the problem. You know, you were selling drugs and you were ruining your community. The reason that we had to have these drug laws put in place was so that people could live in their communities. They could come home, not be killed, and not have to be, you know what I mean, surrounded by drugs all the time. And I'm not sure that I got through to him, but the discussion was, what you need to do is look at how the laws are made. You know, Ginger, no coach is going to put a player on the field unless they know the rules of the game. And that's the problem. We have too many people wanting to play the game but don't know the rules. And the only way you're going to know the rules is to sit down and learn for yourself, because everybody's issue is not the same. Everybody don't have the same feeling about what should or should not happen. And this is why we've got to come together as a community and educate around our issues. Because the same people that tell me their vote don't count, they need to vote more so than I do. Because you got the court systems, you've got these judges that are being appointed, and they're not there for your interests. I mean, we know what we have now, what we're facing with the Supreme Court. The president thinks that this is his judge. He's appointing this judge to take care of whatever trouble he's going to get into. It has nothing to do with you, the voter, but we've got to vote. We've got to show people that we're concerned about our community. We've got to show people that we're concerned about ourselves, most of all. And not only that, but we got young kids who are coming up in a community, in a world. We don't even know what it's going to look like. We don't know what January 1st is going to look like. So we've got to vote. We've got to vote again, like I say, like our lives depend on it.
Ms. Scatliff, what would you add to that for people who say, well, it's just one vote, it really won't matter, I just can't make the time, or it's just they already feel as if they know which way the election will go?
Well, being in the election office, I have seen one vote made a difference. So I would let everybody know every vote counts. So get out there and vote.
Yeah, and Dr. Wright, what would you add to that?
I would just add to that, similar to a point Mrs. Neal made. We know that when people vote, you're in essence allowing yourself to be represented, and there are benefits from having increases in minority representation and female representation, more sexual orientation variation, right? So LGBTQ plus individuals. So when you're able to vote, you're now putting a person in place to act in your interests. So there are very important contextual interests, very important differences across, again, different social identities. This is your ability to put someone in place who's going to advocate for you, who's going to pursue those policies that are going to be beneficial and important, whether it's education policy or reform of student loan debt or healthcare policy, right? So your vote is how you ensure that your interests are known.
And what do you think is the most important thing people should do before they head to the polls? Because we're hearing that lines are long, and some people are saying, oh, they're long because people are taking their time because they don't understand what's on the ballot, and this is the first time they're seeing what's on the ballot.
Well, to that point, I would say there are lots of nonpartisan websites and organizations providing information. So visit a nonpartisan website. We know there's lots of misinformation out there as well, but going to a reputable nonpartisan website will allow you to get that information, what to bring, how long you can expect to wait, what are the requirements, so that when you're in there, you have the proper identification and there's not a delay, right? So there might be lengthier lines. We know there are more people turning out and registering to vote at very high rates, but be informed. If you're informed and you know what to expect, then you can have your mask and your snacks so that you're prepared for those longer waits that might happen during the early voting period.
Yeah, and speaking of being informed, we want to talk about some of the issues that are on the ballot this year. They include raising Florida's minimum wage, letting all voters vote in primaries, and voter approval of constitutional amendments. How do some of these amendments affect minority communities? I'll let Dr. Wright start with that one.
Excellent. I think, again, these are issues that are particularly relevant, even if we look at the sort of discussion surrounding Amendment 4 and the rights for felons to be able to vote, right? So I think there's a broadening of understanding of the issues that are impacting minority communities. There are introductions of these policies, right? These amendments that could potentially become policies and have very important consequences or effects, right? Beneficial effects for minorities. But again, this is where it becomes critically important that we're aware of those components of different amendments. We're aware of sort of the pros and the cons, and we enter the ballot box fully informed and knowing how we stand on these different issues, but definitely relevant for minority voters. I think this, again, becomes a critical component for us to play a role in the policies that can, directly impact our quality of life as we move forward.
Sure. And Ms. Scatliff, you're seeing the long lines and the long waits, and people are saying they will take as long, it takes as long as it takes. But some of it is because they are figuring out what the issues are. What would your advice be to them before they show up on Election Day?
Well, we do mail out sample ballots. I would say review the sample ballots and study the issues, study the amendments. Also, I would agree with Ms. Wright. If there are nonpartisan places out there, nonpartisan people that they could call to get familiar with some of these issues that they're not familiar with. But if you get your sample ballot, review your sample ballot, mark your sample ballot so you could take it to you to vote with you when you go to early vote or to your polling place on Election Day.
Okay, and I just feel like if the more, we said it already, the more people know, the smoother things will go on that day. Ms. Neal, would you like to weigh in on any of what we're talking about right now, especially knowing what is on the ballot before you actually head to the polls that day if you're going to vote on Election Day?
Well, certainly. Enough, if people were to tune in even to their news stations, they can get some kind of semblance of what's going on and what's happening. In Florida, everybody is not in the community where they are able to gather information, but somebody knows someone. I have emails. I have people who email me all the time asking me would I help them, with who to vote for. Mm-hmm. And I've sent out my cheat sheet to anybody who wants it. All they have to do is email me and I'll send them a cheat sheet. And that go right on into the polls and vote. Those of us who know we've got to do better, and that's what I say. Education is key, and every opportunity we get, we've got to put that educational piece out there so people will know what they're doing. And not only that, but if they feel empowered with education, I think we'll have more people to vote. A lot of times people don't want to admit that they don't know. So they'll take the hardy attitude, well, my vote don't count. But your vote don't count because you don't know who to vote for.
And there's no shame in asking for help. So Eric, are your friends talking about amendments? Is that something that even concerns you, or are you just voting on the big issues?
So recently today, I actually did have a conversation with a a young person that I do know, and they were talking about, I think it was Amendment 2, which regards the minimum wage, as you guys were talking about. And I think, again, these are very important things because we have people who sometimes have 2 jobs and they still can't afford to pay or cover their expenses. And so I think that for anyone who wants to have a good quality of life, these are things that very much matter. I know young people were very upset last time with the way a prior amendment that was passed was treated, particularly for felons to have their right to vote restored and having to pay fees. I remember young people were very frustrated, and I think civic engagement among young people matters a lot. I work with Hispanic Federation. Earlier this year, we were doing census work and encouraging people to fill out the census. Sometimes people don't realize how important all these things are because that determines how much funding the state receives, which then determines the school system, the hospitals, everything locally up till nationally. And so I think going back to your question, young people do have very large and general ideas of what they want to fight for, but occasionally some of the ideas of the amendment have been brought up, although I think being educated about it more would definitely be a great thing to do.
Yeah, and Eric, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but how old are you?
I am 20 years old.
Okay, and the story that I was most fascinated with, Shaquille O'Neal, and we're all familiar with him. He recently came out on his podcast. He's 48 years old and said that this is the first time in an election that he has actually voted. And he said when he did it, it just felt so good. So if he can come out and say, okay, this is the first time I'm doing it because I know it's very important, then I feel like it sets a great example for everyone else. There's just no reason to be embarrassed about not having done it before. So the other thing we want to talk about is following some high-profile cases where we saw law enforcement officers killed, black men and women like George Floyd and, of course, Breonna Taylor. The NBA pushed to turn arenas where players usually hold games into voting locations. That includes the Amway Center where the Magic usually play. Orlando Mayor Buddy Dyer and the Orlando Magic head coach recently spoke about this decision with News 6 reporter Nadine Yanis. Let's listen to what they had to say.
I think there'll be a lot of people that want to come vote at the Amway Center just because it's something special. We've never been able to do this before because usually the NBA season is full in swing and the facilities in use. And then you have the opportunity for people that don't have a car to simply walk to this location from anywhere pretty much in downtown or in Paramore.
I think that what our players showed, with our whole league, everybody showed, is that as a group of people, we want change. We're willing to work, or we're anxious to work, committed to work towards positive and sustainable change.
Can you take me back to that game? I think it was Game 5 with Milwaukee when we boycotted the game. Take me back to that moment.
That night, after the games were canceled for that day, there was a scheduled players-only meeting. They had had a couple of those before. I think great things came out of that. Doc Rivers, the players asked him to speak on behalf of the coaches. And one of his big points was about voting. I would think that for the local communities, that the people like in the Paramore, for instance, it will make it a lot easier for those people. I would think that for people that work downtown, they can come in lunch hour. Again, what we're hoping is another way that more people will find it easier to find a place that they can vote.
Thank you.
That is just so important. So, Ms. Neal, how important is it that the movement by the NBA, that they came out and they said, this is what we're going to do to try and make some things right and better?
I think it was the best thing that could have happened. They showed the buy-in to the community. And I was actually thrilled to see that happen. And people, a lot of times people want to go who've never been to the Amway. You know what I mean? This is an opportunity for people to come and go to the Amway and see what's going on. But the fact of it is that these players thought it not robbery to make it comfortable, make it easy for people to vote. That says a whole lot.
Yeah, and we take for granted that, you know, everyone cannot afford to go see an Orlando Magic game, and that may be the first time that one of their favorite they see where their favorite players, you know, take to the court. So it's just a neat experience. And to have it in downtown Orlando, as it sits right there in certain communities, how important is that? Ms. Scatliff, I'll let you start.
Well, I think opening the Amway as one of our early voting location was one of the best things we have done. I have voted at the election office all my life, but I am going to the Amway this time to vote because I think what the NBA and all the coaches and everything that they have done is amazing location. I think is in a perfect spot where people could go out to vote, walk there. I am enjoying it. I love it, and I will be voting at the Amway this year for this election.
Okay, and so Eric, you know, as a young person, when you see that that venue has been opened up and will be used the way it has been used, what do you think?
I think it's a phenomenal idea. I mean, I think that sometimes we don't cater to young people enough. I think this is a wonderful way to do it. Hearing leaders and even people that they look up to, or even things that they're very interested in, organizations, it's a wonderful thing to encourage them to go out to vote. I've also heard some really good things about the Amway Center, and in terms of the lines being so long, the Amway Center specifically has been very efficient and very quick, as far as I've heard. So I think that, again, in general and principle, this is a wonderful thing. We need to continue to find ways to cater to young people and to find ways to appeal to them.
Yeah, and Dr. Wright, how important is it that, you know, this is happening and the NBA has made that decision?
I would echo the points of Eric, right? And I would also add that accessibility becomes really important, right? There's limited confusion once you know you can go to the Amway Center to complete your early voting process, right? As was mentioned in the clip that you all played, you're able to walk there. You can, you know, many buses go there. So it increases the access to this voting center. I think similar to Eric's point, right? Younger voters might not be mobilized by politicians who've had very lengthy careers and maybe engaged in questionable actions earlier in their careers or at later periods. They might be more likely to vote when they see NBA players whom they have high levels of respect and admiration for saying, listen, this is important enough to us that we're going to make a stand so that we can have access to early voting in the Amway Center. So I think accessibility and, again, those potential effects of having such well-known athletes taking a stance on this access issue.
And it is a matter of getting the word out, because after all the hard work to turn the Amway Center into a voting site, there is concern that not enough people are taking advantage of the location. News 6's Jerry Askin talked to one woman who knows all too well the sacrifices that were made for people to be able to vote.
We haven't really seen long lines here outside the Amway Center for early voting, but I talked to the great niece of a man who was lynched and killed back in 1920, fighting for blacks to be able to vote. And she said black people who choose not to vote are actually disrespectful.
Vote! V-O-T-E, vote!
Sharon McWhite, who has already cast her ballot, has a big reason to push the importance of voting this year. Especially, she said,
if you're African American and you look like me, people of color, you need to be at the polls.
She said every election year is a sad reminder of the sacrifices made by her great uncle, Julius July Perry. Perry was lynched and killed by a white mob on Election Day in 1920 in what later became known as the Ocoee Massacre. In fact, as many as 50 black men were killed.
It hurts me to the core of my heart to know that we have polling places that are empty in our African American neighborhoods.
Meanwhile, the Orange County NAACP has also been pushing black people especially to vote.
If it's no more than just an act of symbolism, vote for the sacrifices that were made. Push the vote.
President Beverly Neal said she protested and fought as a girl for the right for blacks to be able to vote. She told me she supports the recent protest after George Floyd was killed, but says,
it's not only pushing the issues, but you got to push the vote.
Much more blacks and minorities to get out and actually early vote. You can find out more about early voting locations across Orange County right now at clickorlando.com. Outside the Amway Center, I'm Jerry Askin, getting results, News 6.
All right, so you may have recognized one of our panelists in that story, Miss Neal. Well, I mean, we just can't hear from you enough. And I know you've said it before, but when you talk about, you know, what happened in the Ocoee massacre, that people were killed simply because they voted, what does that tell you about the importance of your vote?
It's important because they want to take it from you. A thief does not go in and steal nothing that's not of value. So that just goes to show you just how valuable your vote is and the difference that it can make. I mean, if I was listening to President Obama today, he said when he ran, they were able to get 60% of the African American vote. Just think what could happen if we got 80%. Do you realize what we will do? We will take the Senate, the House, and you won't have 144 bills sitting up there that are being ignored. You will have people who are out there realizing and understanding that they are there to represent you. And I always tell people, understand now, we are the employers. They are the employees. So act like it. And if they don't do right, fire them.
So, you know, you talk about the numbers of African Americans who voted for President Obama. So we have some more numbers. At over 17%, Hispanics make up the largest minority group of registered voters in Florida. But in some counties, that number is even higher. Now, according to Osceola County Supervisor of Elections, about 48% of the county's registered voters are Hispanic or Latino. So how does this impact things in counties like Osceola County? Dr. Wright, can you start with the answer to that, please?
I think it has a huge potential for shaping the election, right? So we've talked a lot about diversity within Florida and how diverse Florida is as a state, right? And the Latino sort of subcategory is particularly diverse. So I think when we think of voting patterns of Cubans, for example, compared to Puerto Ricans, we know that there's a history of Cubans supporting Republican candidates, but the size of the Puerto Rican body here in Florida, as well as the size of Venezuelan voters, is also increasing. So I think there's a historical legacy of Black voters playing very particularly important roles in shaping electoral outcomes. But I think particularly in this Florida context, Latin American votes absolutely are going to make a difference. They absolutely, similar to younger voters, have the ability to shape this election.
Yeah, Eric, when you hear those numbers, what do you think?
This makes me think that this is definitely the time for us to make our voice heard and to ensure that our communities are no longer silenced. I think that a lot of people are disappointed that in terms of our government, a lot of it doesn't represent the people. It doesn't represent the constituents. And it's very unfortunate when minorities don't go out to vote. So I think that this is a perfect opportunity for us to reclaim what is ours. It's a perfect opportunity for us to actually be represented. A lot of people don't realize how much power their vote has. A lot of people don't realize how much of an impact it can actually have in our communities. And I think, again, this would be a wonderful thing for us to do, to go out, to be listened to make sure that people know that we will not take no for an answer when it comes to voting.
Yeah, and we have some more questions for you that are coming in online at clickorlando.com. This one is for Dr. Wright. Nalda brought up a political ad targeted at Cuban voters saying they could live in communism if Joe Biden is elected. She asked why politicians use scare tactics like this one.
So we've had a history of sort of negative political ads really shaping how voters look at different candidates. I think in this election and the 2016 election, we've seen this huge uptick in misinformation. So not only sort of scare tactics, but misinformation to then scare people into behaving a certain way or abstaining from voting. There definitely have been increases in targeted efforts at suppressing the Latino vote, right? We mentioned this earlier. There can be sort of higher levels of mistrust in different segments of the population, right? There can be maybe you're not sort of English as your native language. So it makes certain segments of the population particularly vulnerable to falling for these attacks, which I think is why there's this element of misinformation targeting these most vulnerable voters. I think similar to the sort of strategies or tactics that we saw in the 2016 election with sort of robots and Facebook and really having these sort of technological ways of scaring individuals and giving them inaccurate information, we're seeing those same strategies increase in the 2020 lead up to this election and currently, right? So I think, again, this is where it becomes critically important to get your own information. If you receive an email and you don't know who it's from, don't open that email. Go to a nonpartisan site, look at information, and then reach your own conclusion about these issues. But lots of misinformation, lots of scare tactics, I think is a very unfortunate sort of strategy at making voters behave one way, again, either abstaining from voting or voting in support of a specific candidate.
Sure, and we're going to stick with political ads for a moment. We have a question for Ms. Scatliff. It says, we received a response from a viewer who does not believe all the political ads on TV are actually factual. Do you think those ads should be fact-checked?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, but how can people do that? And that's for any of you to chime in. How, you can't just believe what you hear on the news sometimes, or just, online. You see it online, you see it on Facebook. How do you know what's real and what's not real? And what should people who are voting do to arm themselves with the best information?
I can start us off here, but similar to sort of previous points, it becomes really important to get your own information, right? If information is being sent to you and it sort of has any sort of information that you don't know whether or not is from a reputable source, you don't know whether or not it's accurate, then check that information, right? You can also sort of Google, you can have conversations, if you're an older individual, conversations with younger voters to see, is this sort of a conspiracy theory? Is there any sort of legs to the information that I'm receiving? This is where discourse becomes really important, right? Just because you receive information does not mean it's accurate. We're seeing a huge uptick in misinformation as a sort of tactic at swaying voters. We're even seeing political leadership, right, not denouncing these sort of conspiracy theories or, information sources that are grossly inaccurate. So it then puts the onus on us as voters, similar to what Ms. Neal mentioned earlier. We're the employers. So check your employees, right? Check their backgrounds, check their stances on issues and see how it aligns with you. But seek your own information. And again, it can be nonpartisan sources that you rely on.
Yeah, and Eric, I know you've been doing your research before you early vote. What are some of the things that you saw previously where you'd get an ad or something and you just shake your head or scratch your head saying, I know this not to be true. And what do you do to arm yourself with the right information?
So I think that what has been mentioned is already accurate enough. I think that learning to use your critical thinking skills and find reputable, trustworthy sources for the information that you listen to or watch is extremely important. I mean, we were just talking about scare tactics and how oftentimes they try to manipulate us through our emotions and through things that we believe very strongly. We need to be able to catch that when it comes. I mean, scare tactics are effective for the same reason that a mother would talk about the boogeyman to get her child to go to bed, right? It works. And so we need to be able to be discerning enough to say, that doesn't sound right. And we need to realize that sometimes they will try to make us react emotionally to certain things. When that happens, we need to be aware, we need to be informed citizens and know that these things need to be checked.
Yeah, don't believe everything you see on Twitter. That's probably the best advice we could give to anyone tonight. And this election has been pretty tense, and for some, the mood this election season has just felt incredibly tense. So recently, Vice Presidential candidate Kamala Harris came to campaign in Orlando, and some President Trump supporters also showed up to protest. So listen to what they had to say.
We're just here to crash it, man. That's simple. There's been, some people are scared to show their patriotism, and that just makes us want to do it even more and crash events and get support Trump anytime we can. Trump likes to troll people. His followers like to troll people as well. We're just showing our support, having fun with it. We're not breaking any windows or anything like that.
That's the right of every American citizen to come out and give their opinion, but we're going to go and deliver at the ballot box, and that's what's most important. So we'll see what happens November 3rd.
And we tried to balance that out with someone saying, we like to troll people, the president likes to troll people, so that's what we like to do. And then the other person saying, it's your right to come out and protest. So, Dr. Wright, my question to you is, what kind of impact do situations like this one have on voters, if any at all?
Well, I hope if, nothing else, it doesn't act as a deterrent for voters to turn out and make their voices known, right? We've seen a huge response from the public in response to racial injustice. And you mentioned these sort of killings of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery, right? We have so many in just a few months period that it becomes people respond to the racial injustice by protesting, largely peaceful protests. In the same way, your right to vote is your right to also exercise and express what you think about the current state of things and which of the candidates you prefer moving forward. So I would say it's interesting how there's a difference in the discourse, but I think getting out and registering to vote and making sure that you actually exercise your right to vote, right? Mobilizing to have protests is important, right? It's your right as an American, but it also becomes really important that you vote so that you can express those views. I also think this really emphasizes the importance of leadership, right? Our leaders matter. Who's in charge matters, and the examples that are being set matter. We've had sort of discourse and we've had political polarization in prior elections in previous years, but we haven't seen these levels of sort of animosity and, vitriol and just negativity overall surrounding this election process. So I would say leadership matters, exercise your right to vote, stay safe, vote in groups if you're able to. If you don't feel comfortable, use those resources that we mentioned earlier.
Yeah, because it can be intimidating to see people on an opposing side surrounding where you're supposed to go in to vote. So hopefully people aren't intimidated by that. So the final question we have for each of you this evening is, how do we come out better as a country on the other side of this election, regardless of what happens? Because I just feel it has been so bitter. It has been so tense. People are angry. We're tired. So how do we come out better on the other side? And Ms. Neal, I'll let you tackle that one first.
Well, first thing I'm going to say, if my candidate wins, I'm going to say, thank you, Lord. That's the first thing I'm going to say. But I think that what we will have solid leadership, real leadership. I say what we've had before is play leadership. You know how you go out, you play house, you play doctor, you play all of these different roles. This is what we've had for the last 4.5 years. It's a person trying out for positions, whatever. Nothing solid, nothing concrete. But I think that what we will see is, most importantly, is respect. And you don't have to like me, but respect me.
Okay. And Ms. Scatliff, how do you think we come out better on the other side?
I think we come out better on the other side if we vote. Vote matters. Every vote counts. I think people, to make a change, you have to vote.
Plain and
simple. That's the only way things can change.
Yeah. Eric, how about you?
I think the most important thing that I can say is specifically love, understanding, being able to communicate effectively. I think that's something that unfortunately our country has failed to do. Mm-hmm. We need to be able to listen to the other side. If we're dissatisfied with the results, that's okay. There's midterm elections. We can vote for senators. We can vote for local offices. We can vote for president next election. But we cannot lose hope. We cannot lose faith. And we must always remember that the person next to me is worthy of my respect, is worthy of being honored, is worthy of being listened to, and we can never let disagreements change that. We need to always respect the people next to us.
And Dr. Wright, I'll let you have the last word on this one.
I would say that we have to vote, right? Voting becomes key. This is how you get to determine the identity of our nation, right? Our nation is incredibly diverse. We have people from every background, every experience you can imagine, but it becomes up to us as voters to say, who do we want to lead our country? Who do we want to be the representatives that put forth policy in our behalf? Voting is key, and we're essentially in this election and future elections, we're going to be voting for the identity of our nation. What do we want America to be known for, and how can we go to heal some of the wounds that I think previous years have made very clear are still very alive and still very real and still very negative?
Well, I certainly appreciate each and every one of you showing up tonight and making time on a Wednesday night out of your busy evenings to talk about a very important topic. And moving forward, I hope we all do come out better and more loving on the other side of this. So Susan Scatliff, Beverly C. Neal, Dr. Kenesha Wright, and Eric LeBron, I want to thank you all so much for being with us and sharing your insights and opinions. And remember, Election Day is November 3rd. So if you're not early voting, go to the polls and make your voice heard. Thank you.